The educational world has undergone significant transformations over the years, and the school experience of today looks a lot different from what it was like in the 1950s. While the 1950s might evoke nostalgia for some, it was an era defined by distinct norms, practices, and values in schools. Join Facts First as we present once normal in schools in the 1950s, now they're gone forever. Gender-Segregated Classrooms. In the 50s, it was the norm for schools to have gender-segregated classrooms. Boys and girls were often placed in separate rooms, and there were distinct curricular and extracurricular activities for each gender. This practice reflected traditional gender roles and societal expectations at the time. The idea was to create a more focused and disciplined learning environment, but it limited interaction and collaboration between boys and girls in an educational setting. Today, co-ed classrooms are the standard, promoting gender equality and allowing students to learn from each other's diverse perspectives. Corporal Punishment. Corporal punishment, which involved physical discipline like paddling or spanking, was widely accepted in the 1950s schools as a means of behavior correction. Teachers and administrators believed that physical discipline would instill discipline and respect among students. But this practice has significantly declined in modern education due to concerns about its effectiveness and potential for physical and psychological harm. Most schools now promote nonviolent disciplinary methods. Strict dress codes. In the 50s, students were expected to adhere to strict dress codes, often requiring formal attire like suits and dresses. Dress codes were enforced to maintain a sense of decorum and discipline in the school environment. Today, dress codes have become more relaxed, allowing students to express themselves through their clothing while still maintaining certain guidelines for appropriateness. The focus has shifted towards fostering individuality and personal expression while respecting basic standards of modesty and decency. Rote Memorization. Education in the 50s put a heavy emphasis on memorization, where students were expected to simply memorize facts, dates, and information and recite them verbatim. Critical thinking and creative problem-solving were not as highly prioritized. This teaching approach has evolved in modern education to emphasize critical thinking, creativity, and understanding rather than mere memorization. Lack of diversity. Schools in the 1950s often lacked diversity in both students and teachers. Racial segregation was widespread in many regions, particularly in the southern U.S., leading to separate schools for black and white students. This practice was a result of racial discrimination and the doctrine of separate but equal. The civil rights movement in the 60s brought significant changes to education, leading to the desegregation of schools and a greater emphasis on diversity and inclusivity in modern education. Today, schools strive to create diverse and inclusive environments that celebrate differences and promote equal educational opportunities for all students, regardless of racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. Limited technology. In the 50s, schools had minimal access to technology compared to today's standards. Classrooms typically relied on traditional teaching methods like chalkboards and textbooks. The concept of computers in education was virtually non-existent, and there was no internet or digital resources. Teachers primarily used physical books, handwritten materials, and visual aids like overhead projectors. In contrast, modern education integrates a wide range of technology, including computers, interactive whiteboards, tablets, and the internet. Prayer in schools. In the 50s, it was common for schools to start the day with a prayer or moment of silence. This practice was a reflection of the prevailing cultural and religious norms at the time. But the separation of church and state, as outlined in the First Amendment, has led to significant changes in this regard. Prayer in public schools has since become a contentious issue, and today it's generally not practiced as part of the official school curriculum. Penmanship lessons. Penmanship and cursive writing were highly emphasized in 1950s schools. Students spent a significant amount of time practicing elegant handwriting with fountain pens and inkwells. Handwriting was considered an essential life skill. But with the advent of computers and the shift towards digital communication, the emphasis on cursive writing and penmanship has diminished in modern education. Heavy textbooks. Textbooks in the 50s were large, heavy, and sometimes cumbersome. These physical books contained a wealth of information but were limited in terms of interactivity and engagement. In modern days, digital resources and e-books have largely replaced traditional heavy textbooks. These digital materials are often interactive, multimedia-rich, and can be accessed on various devices, making learning more dynamic and accessible. Recess games. Recess in the 1950s often included physically active games like dodgeball and kickball. These were considered normal recreational activities and seen as a way to promote fitness and social interactions. But some of these games, like dodgeball, have been criticized in modern education for their potential to promote aggression or exclusion. Many schools today have diversified their approach to recess, offering a wider range of activities that still promote physical fitness, social skills, and inclusivity, aligning more closely with the principles of physical education and child development research. Smoking in designated areas. In the 50s, it wasn't uncommon for some high schools to have designated smoking areas for students. Smoking was more socially accepted and less understood in terms of its health risks. These designated areas were intended to provide a controlled environment for students who smoked, but the harmful effects of tobacco use have become widely recognized since then. Today, smoking on school premises is prohibited in most educational institutions to protect student health and promote a smoke-free environment. Rigid classroom seating. In the 50s, students were typically arranged in rows, facing the teacher, with minimal opportunities for group work or collaboration. This traditional seating arrangement was intended to maintain order and discipline in the classroom. Modern education has moved away from this rigid setup, recognizing the importance of flexible classroom arrangements that promote interaction and collaborative learning. Today's classrooms often feature various seating options, including group tables, discussion circles, and flexible seating to accommodate different teaching and learning styles. Limited special education services. In the 50s, students with disabilities had fewer resources and support compared to today's inclusive educational practices. Special education was not as well developed, and many students with disabilities were often segregated from their peers in separate classrooms or schools. The passage of laws like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in the U.S. in the 70s and subsequent international efforts have led to significant improvements in special education services. Chalkboards and overhead projectors. In the 50s, primary tools for teaching were chalkboards and overhead projectors. Teachers used chalkboards to write lessons, equations, or diagrams, while overhead projectors displayed transparencies that were manually changed throughout the lesson. These tools were limited in terms of interactivity and multimedia capabilities. Today, modern tech has replaced these traditional tools with interactive whiteboards, digital projectors, and electronic displays. These technologies allow for dynamic, multimedia-rich presentations and interactive learning experiences. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you have any of these 1950s schooling practices? Let us know in the comments section below.